Hi, today is Saturday. We have come to the end of the first week of Lent, and we are going to do a little summary of what we have been praying during this week about almsgiving. Not specifically on this means, one of the three means that we are recommended to do between almsgiving, prayer, and fasting. So what we've been doing this week is to try to ponder how the Holy Spirit is inspiring us to take on again the spiritual and corporal works of mercy as part of our Christian life. Now, we were talking about the 7 corporal works of mercy starting from Monday, and also the spiritual works of mercy that is more on the level of the interior needs of people, the spiritual needs that we could attend to. So what we're going to do this day is just to recap a little bit what these invitations are, not so much what only the good things we have done, which is part of it, but how the Lord is trying to work in us, to inspire us and to bring us to a deeper practice of our Christian life through this season of Lent. Now, the way that I'm going to do a summary for this first week is to go back to the Gospels that we've been praying with during this week. And actually, if you were attentive enough, or if you noticed, the summary of this week will be Matthew chapter 5. Not the Gospel of Matthew. The whole of chapter 5 is what we've been looking at in the Gospels of this week. And it will be very apt to look again at the different parts of this chapter, this very important chapter, I would say, in the Gospel of Matthew, because it's about Jesus teaching to his disciples the essentials of what it means to be Christians, to be his followers as Christians, and also what it means to be children of God. So if you take a look at your own Bible, it can be quite interesting. I might even just give you a little image just to encourage you. This is my own Bible, and you can look at here the different chapters and verses. Okay, I'll take a look also, just to see if it's in the screen. And you can see that chapter 5 is actually quite concise, before going to chapter 6. And chapter 6, if you can see there, is where we begin to reflect on Lent, the 3 means about almsgiving, about prayer, and about fasting. So, but before that, there is a chapter 5 where Jesus explains to us what it means to be a disciple, and it gives all the different in that sense, the meaning of what it means, or the meaning of the practice of these 3 things. And this is where Jesus explains it quite concisely for us to make a summary of what our faith is all about. So if you can go back and look at your own Bibles, you will see that there are, if you like, 3 main parts of this chapter. The first chapter is when Jesus gathers his disciples around him and teaches them the Beatitudes. If you remember, there are 8 Beatitudes, and these are basic characteristics of a Christian. Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the gentle, they shall have the earth as inheritance. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall have the fill, and etc. I encourage you, if you have time, just to read it again. So the first part, Jesus gives us like the guidelines or the orientations of how to grow in a Christian life. And it's very much centered on his teaching of the Beatitudes. If you remember, as Christians also, we learn the 10 Commandments, which is in the Old Testament. So somehow the novelty or the new thing that Jesus has brought to us, apart from the Old Testament 10 Commandments, which is still important, he presents to us the Beatitudes as a way to grow and to know the difference. What does it mean to be a Christian? The difference between the Old Testament and the New, and what he's presenting to us as Christians. So once again, if you have time, just look through it again and try to reflect on it as the core of what Lent is trying to bring us back to, through the almsgiving, through fasting, and through the prayer. The second part, if you like, is where Jesus calls his disciples salt of the earth and light of the world. So Jesus is giving Christians or his disciples a very specific task, which is to give taste to a world that is sometimes tasteless, to give light to a world that is sometimes in darkness. So what does this tastelessness or darkness mean? And basically, I would summarize it in two things. The lack of faith, darkness. Faith is like the eyes of a Christian. When there is no faith in a person's life, he cannot see things clearly. Does not interpret the events well without faith. So a Christian contributes faith to the world, which is the light for them to see things as they are, to interpret them in the right way. If you remember, Jesus healed a lot of people, and one of the things he healed was sight. So faith gives sight, and he always says, your faith has saved you, meaning your faith gives you the sight to look at your situations in the right way so that you can respond well to them. And of course, the second thing is being salt, giving taste. So what is this tastelessness? For me, it's the lack of transcendent or basic human values. If you look at our secularized society today, in other words, a society that kind of rejects religion as something archaic and old-fashioned and somehow doesn't want anything to do with it, there's a certain loss of very basic values of life, of kindness, of doing good to others, of being generous, of trusting in a suitable way. You know, our world, our society, of caring for what is common. Somehow our society can lose the taste of these values, and a disciple of Christ is meant to bring back these values to the humanity or to the world through living out the Beatitudes, you know, of compassion, of purity of heart, of mercy, of making peace and reconciliation, of forgiveness, of working towards righteousness. So if you look do a little bit of comparison of the Beatitudes, you will see that Jesus invites us to be this salt, to bring back these basic human values, and also light, to bring faith, to help people to see life in the eyes of God, or what he sees and what he's doing in their lives. So I invite you, before we go to the third part, which is actually a very important part, just also to reflect, when you look through the Beatitudes, try to allow the Spirit to speak to you and see what is he inviting you to develop as a value in your own Christian life. Now, in the third part of this gospel, which is the lengthier part actually, the third part of this chapter of Matthew, is the lengthier part when Jesus declares that he has not come to abolish the law or the Old Testament. In fact, he has come to perfect it, or to fulfill it, to bring it to its end. Actually, if we go to the roots of the word, perfection, it doesn't mean no mistakes, or no errors in life, that we never stumble, etc. What perfection means in the biblical context, in the original Greek version, is about fulfilling its purpose. Something is perfect when it fulfills its purpose. A Christian is perfect not because he doesn't make mistakes or she doesn't have faults, but because they fulfill their purpose in this world, to be salt and light. So Jesus tells us how he has come to fulfill them, and that we need to be more perfect, or rather, he says, if your righteousness does not surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees, then you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So this is taken from verse 20 of chapter 5. What does Jesus mean that we need to surpass the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees? Actually, if you look at it, the scribes are people who know. They're the ones who transcribe, they're the ones who write and interpret, etc. So they know what the law says. The Pharisees are those who focus on the practice of the law, to fulfill the rules, the norms, if you remember all the conversations Jesus had with them. So they are those who practice the law. So the scribes who know and the Pharisees who practice. What Jesus is saying to his disciples and to us as Christians is this. It's not just important to know what the gospel says and to do it, but we need to surpass that righteousness to interpret its interior meaning. So we cannot be just Christians who are satisfied with fulfilling the norms in that sense, or knowing what the Bible says, etc. But we need to interpret the spirit of what these norms and rules and etc. of rituals that we practice, and try to bring out their meaning for our society today. If not, once again, there's no taste because there's no real values transmitted. Now, Jesus here, there are different things, and I don't want to go through all of them, but maybe we can reflect on them. He says very concrete things about this, going back to the interior attitudes of why we practice the norms. So, for example, instead of just not killing, he says, you have heard we should not kill, but he says, don't even get angry. In other words, he's saying, don't nourish hatred in your minds and in your hearts, because what leads to killing is hatred. And hatred is something we can nourish or something we can discourage in the way we think, the thoughts we think, the feelings we allow for us to dwell in. So he's going back to the basics, if you like. Don't nourish hatred so that you will not kill. It's not just about don't kill, but don't nourish hatred. So just one example, another one could be adultery. It says, you have heard don't commit adultery, but I say to you, don't even look at a woman or a man, in our case, in our times, with lust. In other words, what he's saying is, it's not just about not committing adultery. It's about learning how to keep a pure heart. It's about learning to be selfless and not look at the other as an object of my pleasure, but seeing the other as an equal subject as I, who has the same dignity, and it's not just an object of my use. So there are these subtle things in our society we know today. It's so easy to look at another person just as an object of my use, that it's a benefit for me. And Jesus says we need to try to treat others as equals with equal rights and build up relationships in which we learn to, to be in function and service of one another. That's the deep meaning of not committing adultery. It's not just about the sexual sin, if you like. It's about how we treat others and look at them. The same goes for the next one about divorce. It's not just about don't divorce. No, what Jesus is saying here is fidelity in marriage means investment. Marriage is not just a contract. If you notice, in Moses' time, it was a contract. So you can write a writ of divorce and break the contract. And Jesus is saying it's more than a contract. Marriage is something that you need to nourish, that you need to develop. And if there's love and friendship that is nourished, then it strengthens a relationship. And it's not just a matter of fulfilling the norm of not having a divorce, but it's about looking at relationships, especially marriage, in a different way. And in some ways, the church says marriage is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning. And so sometimes it's the way we look at marriage that could sort of affect the way it is carried out or lived. So if we have this perspective that, people get married so that they have to work in that relationship, perhaps then divorce doesn't become an issue that, or rather it doesn't become so easily an option for that relationship. So we can go on the list. Jesus talks about not making oaths to swear by God, and we know it means don't make promises you can't keep. Don't play God just to get a certain gain or a certain trust. Be simple, be humble, and accept who you are and what you can do, and that's it. And let people treat you in that way as you are, no more. And not to take vengeance, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. In other words, try not to multiply violence. He says, not even that. Offer your left, if somebody slaps you on one side, offer him the other side. What does it mean? Don't multiply violence. And violence never serves justice. And this is something that is so important for our times because we are so sensitive and we know about violence that is happening in our societies today. And Jesus is proposing a very concrete way as a Christian how to face the problems of injustice during our times, and never to use violence on others, but to pursue peace in another way. And he says, love your enemies and pray for them. So we can't change the minds of people who could treat us as an enemy would, but Jesus asks us to create a new world order, a new way of relating with others by praying for them. That we can do, leaving them in the hands of God, and by offering them charity. Doesn't mean that we allow ourselves to be abused by them, but it's about learning how to change relationships to create a new order. So then Jesus finishes this chapter 5 with this exhortation. At the end of the day, he's saying we need to show as children of God an extraordinary love. This is what it means to be a disciple of Christ. This is what it means to be a Christian. In our ordinary lives and our ordinariness as well, to live an extraordinary love and charity. It's a tall order, but Jesus is saying this is what is a disciple of Christ or Christian is the way that he can give taste and light in this world. And it's possible, and many have done it, not only the big saints that we know, but many Christians around us who do extraordinary things, live in an extraordinary way in their ordinary lives. And this is our first call as Christians. As Mother Teresa would say, do ordinary things in an extraordinary way. So Jesus says, because you are children of your Father, of God, therefore you must be perfect as God, your Father, is perfect. So as children of God, what Jesus is saying is we have the capacity to love like God, to give an extraordinary love, forgiveness of enemies, praying for them, sometimes being crucified, persecuted, as Jesus says in the Beatitudes, and learning to forgive and love them. This is very extraordinary. But he says this is what will fulfill our identity as children of God, and that is what will really transform our society from within. So this is somehow the summary of this message. I hope this will help us to understand what almsgiving is all about. It's not just about doing charitable works during Lent, or giving more money to the church, or things like that are just external. This chapter 5 of Matthew is helping us to understand that the first means of almsgiving has a lot to do with prayer, which is going to be our reflection next week. Why? Because almsgiving is about becoming like God. It's about learning the heart of God, what kind of love He has for us first, and also for other people, that He's the Father of everyone, even our enemies, and He is the Creator who provides us with all the graces, physical and spiritual, material and also interior, all the graces we need to live out an extraordinary charity as children of God. So just to summarize the qualities of this love that God once was inviting us to follow, in the example of Jesus, 3 qualities: universal love, selfless love, and sacrificial love. Universal meaning for everybody, including our enemies. That's one thing that we can work on in our almsgiving during this Lenten season. How can we love those who we would call our enemies, or those who have hurt us, or those who have difficulty to live with because they're different? So universal. Selfless meaning no hidden agenda, no personal interest in the relationship that is not just. Okay, so how can we be more selfless in the way we relate with other people? Whenever we go to them or we have that contact, that we will be very clear on what are our own personal interests, to be open with it, and to see what is the interest of the other as well, in the relationship. Could be your family, could be relatives, could be workmates, to work on this selflessness and being interested in what the other needs as well or wants from the relationship. And the last, sacrificial love. A sacrificial love is what it means. It's not just about not having my interests, but sometimes sacrificing my own interests, my own needs for the sake of others. For those who are parents, you would know this very easily, sacrificing your own needs for your children, for your spouse, maybe, etc. So how can we grow in this sacrificial love of Jesus on the cross? It was not just that he didn't take interest, or how do you say, it's not just that he didn't use others, but he actually also sacrificed himself, for the sake of all of us. So how can we become more universal in this sacrificial love? How can we become more selfless in the way we treat the others, thinking of their own interests? And how can we become more sacrificial gradually, that in a spirituality, knowing that giving is actually part of our human life and builds us up and makes us fulfilled. God bless you.